Oh, right. So today, what I want to kind of start off with is kind of giving you a framework to think about how you might promote a collection and really how we promote anything. So this four-step process that I'm going to kind of kick it off with, this works really well, whether you're doing like a tiny little one-off pop-up promotion, or if you're doing a huge multi-year layered campaign. The four-step process is really the basis for how we do this. So we're going to start off by kind of digging into that four-step process. Then after that, I'm going to share some inspiration, different ways that we've seen people promote collections, some kind of go-to tactics that might be kind of interesting and fun, I hope. And then my plan is to leave a little bit of time there at the end for questions and comments and conversations. But by all means, if something occurs to you as we're going, just pop into the chat and we'll try to answer things as we go and save a little time at the end as well. So let's get started. Now, oftentimes, like Sarah said, I run the communication services office there at the Oklahoma State University Libraries. So we help promote really anything that the OSU libraries might be doing. And oftentimes people like to come to our office with big ideas, which we love. We love big ideas in our office. We love to talk about big ideas. We love to help people execute big ideas. And lots of times people show up in our office and the first words out of their mouth are something like, I have an event that I want to host, or we have a press release that needs to go out, or we want to launch a Twitter account. And when that happens, really what we're talking about is tactics. And when we're talking about tactics, we're actually jumping all the way to the middle of the process. And so when people come to us with these big ideas, we try to get them to stop, take a little step back, and think first about what is your goal and who is your audience. This is like a mantra in our office. What is your goal? Who is your audience? That's really how we start these conversations and pick the tactics that are going to get the most bang for our buck. So quick overview, when I say the four-step process, this is really the fundamentals of all things strategic communications. We use this for everything. I love the four-step process. I four-step process my grocery list. So I apply this to everything. So real quickly, step one is research. Step two is planning. Step three is execution. And step four is evaluation. So let's talk a little bit about each of these steps. So we start off with research. And I know sometimes research kind of carries this real heavy connotation for people. When I say we start every campaign by doing research, I'm not talking about writing a thesis, usually. If I work with friends and colleagues who are doing huge statewide, regional, national campaigns, literally spending millions of dollars on advertising. If you're putting that kind of money into advertising, yeah, your research probably does look closer to a thesis, but for a lot of our stuff, it can scale, right? So in the very least, when I am starting a research project for one of our promotions, I like to have two things, just some background information, right? The who, what, where, when, why of this thing that we want to promote. That background information might be a few paragraphs, it might be a few pages, but just like a little summary piece. And then I want to have a problem statement. So what is going on that we want to fix? Because if you don't really have a problem, then why are we having a communications plan for it? So that's sort of like the bare bones right there of our research. But communications research can look like a lot of other things too. These are some of the real common tools that we use in communications research. So we might do a communications audit, focus groups, interviews, surveys, audience analysis. So research can also mean those things for us. Now, while I'm in my research phase, there's some other components of the plan that I like to include in this step. And so that first piece, like I mentioned, we always start off with what is your goal? And when we're writing a communications plan, we kind of think of these, the goals and the objectives as kind of separate pieces. Some people combine those. And if you're writing really good, measurable goals, you can combine those. But I like to, especially when I'm working with people who don't do strategic communications all day, every day, I like to kind of separate those out because your goal is going to be sort of a general statement of what you're trying to accomplish. And this is oftentimes where we can get people to start. So what's your goal? Maybe you want to increase use of a collection. Maybe you want to engage a younger audience. Maybe you want people to come to your event, right? So when we are articulating our goals, oftentimes we kind of talk about them in that way. Then our objectives help us make those goals measurable. So our objectives are going to be kind of those key performance indicators for each goal that we have. So for every goal, I'm going to have one to a few objectives that are going to help me measure that goal. So here's just a quick example. I tried to pick something kind of quick and easy just to kind of illustrate what it looked like when I'm talking about goals and objectives. So one example might be if your goal was to engage a younger audience. That's a great goal. But how do we know if we did that? How do we know if we were successful? So some possible objectives for something like that might be to increase social media follows from users under the age of 25 by 25% in 2021. If we have a museum or, an attraction or something, or events that people have, maybe increase youth ticket sales by 50% in 2021, or maintain an average attendance of at least 50 at monthly youth programs. So these would be some key performance indicators that would help us decide if we engaged a younger audience. Now, a good objective is going to name the audience that we want. It's going to say the action that we want them to do. It's going to say how much we want them to do that action and the time frame in which we want them to do that. And when you're talking about your goals and objectives, I would also caution against having too many goals for a particular campaign or promotion. 1 to 3 goals is great. If you're doing a campaign or promotion and you really only have one goal, that's good, that's concise, that's focused. If you start getting more than 3 goals for a single campaign, it can get a little hairy, it can get a little out of control really fast. So just kind of keep it simple. Okay, so also in our research, we need to define our audience. Who are we really trying to talk to? And one thing, again, and this is kind of I think a mistake that I see people make a lot. I'll ask them, who's your audience? And they say, everybody, which is great. Sure, we want everybody to know about the amazing collections that we have. But if we're being really honest with ourselves, everybody's not interested. So to do a good promotion, right, it's going to take resources, it's going to take time, it's going to take money. It's going to take your effort and your energy. And so we want to focus where we can be most successful. So I would encourage you to get really honest about who your audiences are. And you probably have multiple audiences, but we want to identify those multiple audiences so that we can target them with our communications. So when I'm trying to make my list of audiences for a particular project, I like to ask these 4 questions. You ask yourself, who needs to know or understand? Who needs to be involved? Whose help or support is needed? And who is going to be impacted? And you go through these questions for your project and you'll start to identify some of these different audiences. And because we want to target our messages, pick our channels and our tactics to the audiences that we're trying to hit. Now, every couple of years, I go through this brainstorming process with my team. It's really handy. And we go through and we brainstorm all of our possible audiences and all of our possible communication channels. So when we start asking those questions and thinking about different groups that might be our audiences, we start seeing a lot of different ones. So this is just like a quick snapshot, right? Like just a few off the top of my head that might be audiences you're targeting when you're promoting your collections. So if you have any sort of membership, right? Like people become members, or if you're connected to a museum or some sort of giving level thing, members might be visitors, people who actually come in person to consult with our exhibits, our events, or our collections, researchers, donors, board members, Our collections oftentimes are great educational resources, so maybe homeschooling parents and teachers might be an audience. Opinion leaders and people who hold the purse strings for us are often audiences, so legislators and grantors. The media might be an audience, and they can be great partners in helping educate people about what we want to try to do. Our partners, our sponsors. And when we go through those 4 questions, right, and we start thinking about whose help do we need, whose support do we need, oftentimes we identify a lot of internal audiences as well. And it's easy to forget about them when we're planning our campaign, but we need their help and support, and they need to understand what we're doing as well. So you might have your administrators, your web team, your curators, your docents. They might be part of your audience as well. So we want to figure out who our audience is and what we want our audience to do. And I think too, I really encourage my students always, when we're thinking about audiences, you want to think about what you want your audience to do and what your audience wants to do. And where we overlap between what we want and what our audience wants, that overlap is where we can be really successful. So, but we can't find that overlap until we define who those audience members are. So once we have our goals, and we have our background, and we have our audience defined, we can really start planning. So that research is going to help us pick the right strategies and tactics. We might have our favorites, we might have our go-tos, but if we're trying to hit different audiences, maybe we need to try some different strategies and tactics. So strategies are going to be how you're going to approach a challenge. What devices are you going to employ, and what core messages you're going to use. All of these are different ways we can come at the idea of strategies. I tend to use that second one. I like my strategies to kind of focus on the devices that I'm going to use. I kind of put my different communication channels into buckets and then flesh those out. And so when I'm thinking about these buckets, these different kinds of channels that I want to use, I tend to take this approach of owned, earned, and paid. And so we want to have a mix of owned, earned, and paid, so that we can maximize the benefits and the weaknesses of these different kinds of channels. So an owned channel, just like what it sounds like, right? This is a channel that is mine. I can do whatever I want with it. So my website is an owned channel. The signage in my building is an owned channel. If you have exhibits or galleries that are part of your collections, your organization, those are an owned channel. And some people debate on where social media falls, but for me, if it's my social media account, like the Edmond Lowe Library has social media accounts, our oral history department has social media accounts, our archives department has social media accounts, I consider those owned because I decide what goes on them. I write that content, I design the videos and the graphics for it, and I decide when that stuff goes up. So the things that I am posting on my social media are owned. So the benefits of owned are that control, right? They're mine, so I get to pick what it looks like, when it goes up, how long it stays there. Then we have earned channels. So earned channels are when we get somebody else to carry our message for us. So I posted that on social media, but when people commented and shared and liked it, that engagement was earned. So social media can kind of fall into all 3 of these categories. Our traditional media relations, where we're pitching stories and sending press releases out to the media, when that gets picked up, that's earned coverage. You convinced a reporter that this was a good story. They came and reported on it. Their editor decided it fitted in with their publication, and they put it in there. So it was earned. Word of mouth is also earned communications. So if you wow your audience enough and they go tell other people how great you are, that's earned communications. So these are all different earned channels. So some of the benefits of earned is that it has a lot of validity with our audiences because a third party has sort of vetted that message. Somebody else is endorsing you. Somebody else decided that this was interesting, good, accurate information that people needed to know. So it bumps up that credibility with earned. It can be a lot more work to get that earned though, because you don't have that control. And the lack of control of earned is also one of the drawbacks. So if we're doing word of mouth, you don't know what people are saying about you. And if you've worked with the media for a while too, you know that sometimes they don't quite get it all right. And sometimes they don't quite focus on the thing that you really wanted them to. But it's earned, right? We don't have that control, but we get great credibility from it. Then the last piece is paid. So paid is exactly what it sounds like. It's placements that I paid for. So traditionally this means advertising, and that can look like a lot of different stuff. Maybe it's something in the newspaper or on the radio or TV, but also digital. Now we have lots of digital options for advertising. So advertising gives us a lot of that control that we get of those owned channels, because if you're paying for it, you decide what it looks like, what it's going to say, when it's going to go, but it costs. And advertising can get very expensive very quickly. But when we kind of dip into all three of these categories, we can maximize the strengths of each to help minimize the weaknesses. So think about the different kinds of places that those can go. So strategies and tactics. If strategies are in general how we want to approach this problem, the tactics are going to be the actual activities to execute that strategy. So for every strategy, you're going to have one or more tactics that might go along with it. So it could look something like this, right? Maybe my strategy is to utilize digital advertising opportunities to drive web traffic to my digital collection. Right? That's a strategy. That's the general way I'm going to approach this problem. And then I'm going to have tactics. And these are just a couple. There would be a lot more tactics for something like this. But if I want to do some real digital advertising, first thing I need to do is evaluate and optimize the SEO for those collection pages. I need to evaluate and optimize the responsive design for those collection pages. If I'm going to pay money to send people to that digital collection, it better be ready for prime time. When they get there, they're going to bounce right out and I just wasted my money. Then I'm going to customize and schedule Facebook ads for lookalike audiences, you know, and maybe I'm advertising on Instagram, maybe I'm advertising on Google. There are lots of different ways that I could do that. But this is just to show you what a strategy with its nested tactics might look like. All right, so also in my planning phase, I want to think about my materials and budget that I'm going to need. And I include this in the planning phase because you need to make sure before you start executing that you have all the materials and equipment and everything that you need to make this happen. So I like to go through tactic by tactic and just start making a list of the equipment, the manpower, the supplies that I'm going to need to execute those specific tactics. And then I align the costs that go along with those. And lots of times, especially for like kind of these small things, maybe we're doing a lot of it in-house, it might not seem like there's a cost involved because we're all doing it in-house. In-house is not free. Everything we do takes time. Everything we do costs money. And so we need to acknowledge that. And those internal costs are not insignificant. So I think it's good to include those in there. And including those in-house costs can also help us secure that out-of-house funding. So if you can look at your budget and see like, here's the $5,000 worth of in-kind that we're contributing to this with, you know, our own supplies, our own printers, our own people, our time. And really we just need this little piece of the funding to come from higher up or our grantors. Grantors love to see that in-kind contributions for what we are putting together. And so that can help you secure funding internally and externally as well. And then making that list too, I think helps you keep from being surprised halfway through your campaign. So I'm going to tell stories on myself and tell you about mistakes that I have made. But very early on in my career, I was working on a campaign, and part of the campaign that we were doing, we were going to send this huge mail merge out to all of our donors. And I wasn't in charge of buying the letterhead, and the letterhead was just always there. We had like this weird endless supply of letterhead, and till it came time for me to do this mail merge to 3,000 people. And then all of a sudden we were about a ream short on letterhead. But I was taking for granted that letterhead was in-house and we always have it. And I didn't plan ahead. So you better believe from that point out, 20 years later, I always make sure I have enough letterhead before I start a project. But planning those materials and budget ahead of time help us do that. So once we've decided on our strategies, our tactics, we've made sure that we have the materials and the funding that we need, it's time for us to actually execute our plan. We start getting to put it into practice. So you can see there's a lot of groundwork that comes in before we start jumping into the doing. And so when it comes execution time, I like to work from a timetable and task list. And so again, I just go tactic by tactic. And I like to start at the end and work my way back. So this is an example of what a timetable task list might look like for a press release with my team. So I start at the end. The last thing I want to do is distribute that press release to the media, and I put the date that I want that to happen. But before I do that, I need to put my press release online. And before that, it needs to go through the approval process. It needs to be fact-checked and proofread. We need the image. We need to write the story. We've got to interview the source. And so I just back those things up. And for every action item, I assign a person who is going to do that action item and the due date for that action item. And then we just check it off as we go. And I love to check things off a list. I find it very, very satisfying. So that's part of the reason why my structure is set up this way. And then step 4 of our process is evaluation. So if we did a good job in step 1, if we wrote really good goals and objectives, then we've set ourselves up well to be able to do our evaluation. And there are lots of different things that we can measure. Some things are easy to measure and some things are hard to measure. I don't shy away from the things that are hard to measure. But I would think really broadly about some of the stuff that you might be wanting to evaluate. Some of the metrics that we can look at for promoting a collection. If you have your collection digitized, if you're promoting a digital collection, then maybe you're looking at the web traffic. How many hits are you getting to those pages? But how many searches, how many downloads, how many files are accessed? We can measure those things. Not all of our collections are online, but we can look at reference questions. So how many reference questions did we get about this collection? How many people attended our events? One that I like is how many meaningful conversations did we have about this? I find this is something that can happen a lot at events is maybe you have 100 people show up to the event, but if 7 of those people come and have a meaningful conversation with you about that collection, those people are really engaged with the information and they're the ones who are going to be more likely to come back and use it when they need it. We can look at media coverage and impressions. We can look at the social media engagements. We can look at citations, lots of different things that we could possibly measure to see if we're meeting our goals. So in my evaluation step, when I'm writing out a plan and really documenting it, I like to just copy and paste those goals and objectives down in my evaluation and then start going through. So we're going to use those to figure out what worked and what didn't and why. And that why, I think, is really important. I think it's also important to remember that measurement doesn't just happen at the end. Now, if you're doing a real short thing, a little pop-up, a little one-off, you might not be able to measure as you go and pivot. But if you're doing a campaign that's going to last a few weeks, months, maybe even years, you need to have some midpoints in mind so you can look and see if you are on track. Because you can change directions midstream. That's okay. We want to think about being patient, right? Things don't happen overnight. So if we're setting those benchmarks, we want to be patient and realistic to start seeing those actions and behaviors that we want to see. But we also want to be flexible enough that we're okay changing course partway in if that's what the data shows us we need to do. So I mentioned, right, we're going to look at what went well, what didn't go well, and why. And I think that why is really important. And I think sometimes it's easier to figure out why things didn't go the way we planned than to figure out why things did go the way we planned. I am a firm believer that we learn more from what went wrong than from what went right. And so if you didn't quite meet your goals, and maybe you set stretch goals, that why didn't we get there can be really interesting component. And we call it a 4-step process, but it's really a cycle because the evaluation of one campaign is going to become the research for your next campaign. And if you really give yourself some time to think about what worked, what didn't work, and why, that's going to be really great background and research to inform the next promotion and the next effort that you do. So that was pretty fast for the 4-step process. Before I move on to talking about some different inspiration, do we have any questions?
I'm monitoring the chat for you. I think so far we just had a question on whether you would be willing to share your slides.
Definitely, of course.
I'll help. Help where needed to make that happen.
All right. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we're going to move on. So, like I said, people tend to get excited about the tactics. And oftentimes that's where people want to start. And so you can see if you've done your research, you picked your audience, you picked your goals, that's going to help us pick the best tactics for what we want to do. So let's talk about some fun tactics. I think people get excited about the tactics because oftentimes it's an opportunity for us to get really creative, and that is always fun. So media relations is a strategy that we use in a lot of promotions, and so I wanted to spend a little time talking about that. So lots of times people want a press release, right? This is a big one. Everybody wants a press release. And I have found a little bit of a shift over the course of my career. I think in the last several years, when people say we need a press release, oftentimes they don't mean an actual like headline, dateline for immediate release, send it to the newspapers, press release. What they really mean is just go tell people about this. But the media can be a great way to help us do that. Now, if you're trying to get the media to pick up your stories, one of the things that we have to understand first and foremost is when we're dealing with the news media, the stories that they are interested in are news. So what is news? We have 6 characteristics of news. Different places will sometimes use different terminology for this, but the traits are basically the same. And the first big one is that it needs to be timely. So if you've got something that's evergreen, it never, like a story that's always going to be good, they could run it today, they could run it 6 months from today. Those are nice to have in your back pocket, but that's not necessarily going to push you to get coverage. So you need it to be timely. There are lots of different ways we can make our stories timely. A great way to do that is to think about what's happening on the calendar. So is it National whatever History Month? Is it National Observation of this thing, day, week? Those can be great ways to kind of pin it on a timely thing. Holidays can be anniversaries, can be a great way to make something that might be evergreen more timely. So why is this news right now? Another characteristic of news is that it's unique. And when I say unique, I mean one of a kind. Nothing else in the world like this. And a lot of our collections are. Like, that's why we're collecting these things. These are truly unique resources. And so that is something you can capitalize to make your story newsworthy. Celebrity is another aspect of newsworthiness. So there's a celebrity component to this. Location. So if we can localize this in a way, and this is particularly handy if you're dealing with local media. Impact. How is this going to impact people? How is this going to change lives? How is this going to make things easier? How is it going to make people more money, save them time? What's the impact? And then there's conflict. So different things that we can think about. If there's a national story going on and there's some way that your collection can tie into that national news story, that's another way that sometimes we can make our news timely. But if you think about these characteristics of news, that's going to help you come up with an angle for your story that reporters will actually be interested in. And then when it comes time to actually work with the media, we have different ways to do that too. So of course we have the press release, and we're all familiar with those, right? We just write up the article for them and send it to them. And maybe they take it, maybe they rewrite it, maybe they throw it in the trash. That's how press releases work oftentimes. But you don't always have to write a press release, right? If you don't have someone on your team who writes a lot of press releases, maybe you don't have time, you can also just pitch your story. You don't always have to write it out for them. And in fact, some reporters would prefer this. And that's where the relations part of it is. You want to kind of get to know your reporters who cover your beats so that you can give them the information in the way that they want. But sometimes we can just call them or send them an email and say, here's my story. here's the angle, here's the ways I can help, and they can come and cover the story themselves. If you have a really big story, something that lots of news outlets might be interested in, then press conferences are another way that we can work with the media. And the picture that I have here at the bottom of the slide is a picture from a press release that we did when we were launching one of our oral history collections. And so I believe this photo is from when we launched our Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame collection, and we piggybacked on another event. So the Hall of Fame, the Women's Hall of Fame was having their annual event, and so we piggybacked our press conference with the oral histories for this with their meetings. So there were kind of multiple things going on. We had it at the Capitol, so a lot of the reporters were already there. We did it here in the Blue Room at the state Capitol, and so we were able to do a press conference. We've done a couple of those, not super common for us. One of my favorite ways to work with reporters, though, is in providing them with research support. So helping them use our collections to research a story that's not necessarily about our collection. So I've been able to develop, and it's also a great way to help develop those relationships. So I help reporters a lot find photos from our collections, interviews from our oral histories, historical documents that we have on the history of campus and Stillwater. And so it really kind of helps me build that relationship and do them a favor. So maybe they owe me, but it's also a great way to get our collections in there and get them into the media. So lots of different ways that we can use media relations. Next is events. We love events at the OSU Library. We have a lot of events, and these can look, again, like different things depending on what we're doing. So collection openings, exhibit openings, those are oftentimes great reasons to have an event. Performances are another one. So the photo we have down here at the bottom is the Red Dirt Rangers. And they were close friends with a Oklahoma poet that we have a collection on, and they came and performed at an event we did promoting that particular collection. We have another researcher on our team who has a theater background. She's written a number of theatrical performances based on our collections. So that was a really fun way to promote our collections. Also, I have a little advertisement here for an event from the National Archives actually happening tomorrow, where they have this actress and Smithsonian scholar who's going to come do like a living history presentation as Amelia Earhart. Lots of different ways we can use performance to have events. Research presentations are another real common one, but you also don't have to have your own event to use events to promote your collections. So presenting at conferences, bringing information to trade shows, these are other ways that we can participate in events to promote our collections. And then exhibits. If you are lucky enough to have owned gallery spaces in connection with your collections, this can be a great way to showcase those and a great way to think kind of long-term strategically about what you want to put on display. Obviously, we can't put our entire collection of everything we have on display year-round. You've got to pick what you want to highlight and when it might be timely and when people might be interested in. So owned gallery spaces can be a great way to promote that. If you don't have owned gallery spaces, digital exhibits is another way. And there are so many great examples of digital exhibits from different places. There's a platform called StoryMap that some of our researchers have been using to build digital exhibits. We even have interns building digital exhibits for us in the StoryMap platform, and it's been very handy. They look lovely, they're very dynamic and interactive. Then we also have traveling exhibits. And we can think about traveling exhibits in a lot of different ways, right? If you don't have those gallery spaces, or even if you do, you might develop your own traveling exhibit, send it out into the world, so that you can hit those different audiences. That's the great thing about the traveling exhibits, is they go other places. Or you can maybe apply to bring a traveling exhibit to your organization. If you can find one on a topic that ties in well to your collections, bringing in this new, interesting, novel traveling exhibit can be a way to tie in stuff with your collections. You can partner with someone who's putting together a traveling exhibit. Maybe your entire traveling exhibit isn't about your collections, but maybe a little piece of your collection is featured in that traveling exhibit. So lots of ways to use traveling exhibits. And I think they're just such an interesting platform because just the nature of what they do. They go around to all of these different locations over the course of years, oftentimes, and other people are promoting those things that are in the traveling exhibits. Again, if you don't have your own galleries, loaning objects to someone else, another organization that has a gallery, might be a way to get pieces of your collection out in front of different audiences. And then I think exhibits can also be an interesting opportunity to collaborate. And the one that comes to mind for me that it was so cool, I loved it so much. Several years ago now, the Oklahoma Museum of Art had a temporary exhibition of Oklahoma art from the 30s. And so we don't have Oklahoma art from the 30s in our collection, but we do have a ton of interviews with Oklahomans who lived through the 30s, particularly documenting the experiences of women who lived through the Dust Bowl. So one of our researchers partnered with the Oklahoma City Museum of Art to develop an audio guide for their art exhibition. So the art was there from the museum, but the audio guide was excerpts from our oral history collections with people talking firsthand about experiencing the things that were depicted in this artwork. And it was a really neat collaboration. So different ways that we can use that. Then social media. So there are lots of different ways for us to use social media. If you are launching a brand new social media channel, I would strongly urge you, again, start at that research phase. What are you trying to accomplish? Who is the audience you're trying to reach? Because different social media platforms are going to have different audiences. If you're trying to engage a younger audience, starting a brand new Facebook page is probably not where you want to go. Right? You want to pick the right channel for the audience that you have chosen. But when we have those channels in place, there's still different ways that we can use that. One that we have had a lot of success with and a lot of fun with is our live streams. So we have a Facebook page for the Oklahoma State University Archives. And once a month, we do a live stream we call Archives Live. And our intern actually kind of MCs this. So in this photo here on the slide, you can see our intern Samantha Mackey with David Peters, who is the head of the OSU Archives. So Sam sits down with David once a month and she interviews him on different topics. We plan ahead kind of monthly themes for the social media, and they'll do a live stream. So David will bring out some artifacts and photos, we'll show those, talk about them. Sam interviews them as we go, but we take questions live from our audience and we answer those during the live stream. So it's a fun way to engage our audience. This is also a really great way to use a digital format to promote collections that have not been digitized. So it's not to say we never promote our digital collections on the live streams, but it works really well for those things that are not digitized that we can bring in front of that digital audience and show them and talk about them. Hashtags, again, can be a great way to organize your own campaigns and your own information, but also a way, again, to reach those other audiences. People are searching those hashtags and looking for information there. So I've put a tweet here from the CIA, which, so people always find this funny, but I love the CIA's social media. They have got it together. And if you are looking for ways to promote collections and archival material on Twitter, go look at the CIA's Twitter account. They are crushing it. They are fantastic. And primarily what they are focusing on is their archive. The CIA has an archive and a museum, and that's the kind of stories. They use that information to tell the story of the agency. And so in this tweet here, you can see they were doing a lot of Pride Month content. And so they're using those hashtags. These aren't their hashtags. These are hashtags that people are already using. They got hashtag Pride Month, hashtag LGBTQ, hashtag Pride, hashtag Pride 2020. And also, you know, they're doing a really good job here of kind of incorporating those hashtags into the text itself, not just doing a dump of hashtags at the bottom, which I think works really well on Twitter. It helps save you character count, makes it look less spammy. Social media, we can also think campaigns, contests. And I think when we talk about social media, people tend to think about those big three. You say social media and people think Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. But social media means a lot of things. And I would encourage you, if you're not already, if you're interested in using social media to tell your archive story, promote your collections, podcasts and blogs can both be a great format to do this. Podcasts and blogs allow us to spend a little more time with a topic and explain it and give it a little more context. And oftentimes that's what we need for something like an archival collection. We just need a little more space. So a podcast or a blog, this is going to be a big long-term undertaking. It's going to take a lot of effort up front to get it started and off the ground. And you're going to have to chug along for a long time before you start seeing payoff on those efforts. But those formats can work really well for something like this. Then advertising, as I mentioned, advertising again can mean a lot of different things. Print, radio, television, brochures, posters, things like that sometimes fall into advertising, and then digital advertising as well. One of the drawbacks, of course, of advertising is that it can get very expensive. Digital advertising, though, sometimes if we're doing it well and doing it right, can have a lower kind of barrier to entry financially, because you can kind of set your own budget for it. So you can decide how much you want to pay per click, how much you want to pay per day, how much you want to pay for a campaign, and sort of set your own budget. Now, obviously, you're going to have to invest a certain amount to start seeing some return on it. But there's a lot of different places that we can do digital advertising too. Almost any platform we have now is going to have those advertising options. So lots of things that we can think about with advertising. If you're looking at print advertising gets very expensive very quickly. But if you're looking at print, depending on where you are, what your market looks like, sometimes local print advertising can be really affordable. So, you know, if we're looking at an ad that I might run in the Daily Oklahoman or the Tulsa World, that ad might cost me $2,000 to run. That exact same ad is going to cost me $250 to run in the Stillwater News Press and $75 to run in my campus newspaper. So depending on who your audiences are and what kind of media they look at, sometimes we can find some affordable ways to do advertising. We just have to be very clear about what we're trying to accomplish and who we're trying to reach. And then educational tools and guides. I think this can be another interesting way for us to promote our collections. So the first one I have here is curriculums for teachers and homeschoolers. So if we want to highlight, you know, in our collections, we've got amazing primary resources. These can be great educational opportunities for learners at all levels. But teachers and homeschool communities, they eat this stuff up. So you can partner with an educational specialist to maybe develop some curriculums geared to specific ages and use those as a promotion tool for your collections. We can also do research guides, so maybe kind of thinking at a higher level, but helping academics and higher level researchers figure out how they could use our collections, what is in our collection, what kind of research opportunities might be there, kind of executive summary sort of things. I think citations, our collections being cited in various locations, can be another way that we can kind of use those educational tools to promote. We had a very interesting partnership with Wikipedia, and Wikipedia actually reached out to us. They saw that we had a social media archives position, and they had a program where they were partnering with archives around the country to create Wikipedia internships. So we hired the student, we paid the student, we supervised the student's work. We also kind of gathered the collections. We decided what things they were going to write about and research. Wikipedia partnered with them, training them how to write for Wikipedia, how to do the coding, how to navigate the community aspect of it. We had a seasoned Wikipedia editor who served as a mentor to our Wikipedia intern to sort of help usher them through, because it can be hard to get started as a Wikipedia editor. And then they used our collections as citations to help improve pages that existed already on Wikipedia. She wrote a few original articles for us as well, but a lot of what she did was adding citations and resource links to our collections in things that were already there on Wikipedia. So Wikipedia was able to improve its content with those primary resources. And then we were able to get that added boost of sharing our content on that platform. And our intern got to learn a lot about Wikipedia and develop this reputation as a Wikipedia editor. While she was with us, she also hosted a couple Wikipedia edit-a-thons where she taught anyone who wanted to come how to create an account on Wikipedia and create an article. And then we assigned each of them a topic based on something we had in our collections where we were all able, I participated, it was a lot of fun. We created a new article in Wikipedia linking to our collections, but of course other citations as well. And then documentaries is another, you know, if you have, we've done documentaries in a couple of different ways for our collections. The Indian Outlaws and Angie DeBow, that one was produced by PBS several years ago, but we have Angie DeBow's papers, an extensive collection of hers with our materials. We had a documentary on Paul Miller that we produced ourselves in-house. My team has a multimedia production unit, and so we did a short documentary on Paul Miller. And then recently we partnered with a production company to do a documentary on the Shalako Indian boarding school. And that one turned out amazing. We were very proud of it, and it aired on PBS around Thanksgiving. So documentaries are another kind of educational tool that we can use to promote some of our collections. So those were just some kind of big takes at some different strategies and the tactics that might follow into that. And we've got about 10 minutes left. So I would love to see what kind of questions or comments, or if there's anything further you would like to discuss.
All right. Maybe I will stop sharing and just open it back up. That was a lot of great information, Bonnie. Thanks. That was really well organized. I think while people think about questions for themselves, I have a quick question for you. I'm wondering what has changed. Oh, Nicole, you and I had the same question. What has changed during COVID? Have your strategies changed at all since we've shifted into a pandemic mode?
Well, I think, you know, one of the things that was great for us for many years now, I feel like it was a real slow start, but things have really taken off for us in the last few years. We have been leaning very heavily on finding ways to digitize our collections and digitize collections that we've had for a long time, bring in born digital collections. So when COVID happened, our campus closed, our building closed, and people weren't able to come in and use the library in the ways that they were used to using the library. But one of the things we were able to really double down on were all of our digital resources. And we have a lot of them. And so that really turned out to be a great opportunity to promote our digital collections in that way and point people to those digital collections. So that's one way that I think things have been different. COVID is also a huge national, international story. So if you have anything that in any way ties into COVID or previous pandemics or healthcare, like this could be a great time to make that a timely story. I was actually sitting in on an editorial meeting earlier this week with some other communicators, and one of the things they were talking about is a bit of COVID fatigue. We are all tired of writing about COVID. We are all tired about pitching COVID stories, and we're tired of reading COVID stories. And so, but reporters are tired of writing those COVID stories too, but they still have to because that's the world we live in. So if you can find a different way to come at a COVID story, if COVID is your tie-in. So if you have things about, we were working with someone, a magazine reporter not too long ago, sharing some information that we had in our collections from the flu pandemic. So if you have some things like that that you can make timely. This is a big, big story. So I would think about getting creative about what kind of tie-ins you have to the overarching COVID story. That could be a great way to pivot as well. And then also, you know, we have a lot of events and things like that. And so the way in which we host our events, hold our events, that has definitely changed. We were able to do archives live. Normally it's our intern and David sitting side by side in a room touching stuff, which we didn't do. But we were able to go live via Zoom. We pulled the feed from Zoom, and they both, our intern and David both pulled some of their favorite photos that they hadn't been able to highlight. And we just did like a top, like favorite photos and went through the collection of photos. So I think, you know, we have to kind of think about things. There's some things that, some of the same things we can do in a different way, but then there's some opportunities to do some new different things as well.
I think that's a good point. I'll throw out here too that I know for as far as Oklahoma Archivists Association goes, you know, we had started doing these virtual tours of archives to put on our Facebook page. If anybody's interested to do a virtual tour of your digital collections and sort of pitch some of this stuff, I'd be happy to schedule time with you all to do that through OAA. And maybe there's other things like that too, but throw that out there while there's the perfect segment. Anybody else have other questions that you'd like to chat? You maybe have specific questions about metrics or specific tools, or you know, whether there's audiences that sort of are targeted for one place or the other, or where to find out that information, stuff like that.
Well, and one thing too that I think has happened with COVID is, you know, it really changed our workflow, and we had to change how we work and how we process things. And so, you know, for our oral history department and for our archives and for communication services, it kind of freed us up to do some things that we didn't always have the time to do. We caught up on a lot of transcription. And one of the projects that my team has been working on is really cleaning up and creating nice, engaging landing pages for all of our digital collections. And so we were able to continue working on that project. It kind of freed us up to do some different things. So
I do have a question from somebody about how do you make media connections? So you have any tips or thoughts on how you get started with that?
It can be hard to start. But one of the things that I encourage people to do with this is just absolutely anytime you have an interaction with someone from the media, that's, if you think of it as an opportunity to improve your relationship with them. So don't just think about like getting done what has to be done right now, but like take some time to like make sure you get their name and their contact information. And if you can get, sometimes it's that first little story, they kind of come to you, but then you can talk to them about like, well, if I had something else for you, when would be a good time to call? How do you like to get story ideas? Do you like emails? Do you like press releases? Do you want me to call? Because every reporter is going to be different. Customizing your stuff to the reporter and just making sure that you're not wasting their time. Some people, they call it the spray and pray approach, where we have our press release and we just send it to everybody. And again, everybody's not interested. But if you take the time to kind of customize your pitch or customize your story just a little bit to that particular news outlet before you send it, that can make a big difference. Because too, if you burn them once, right? If you waste their time or, you know, annoy them too much, like they'll blacklist you, like they'll just see your name on the email and they're not even going to open it. So finding ways to make their job easier, finding ways to be helpful, and taking the time to learn about them. So thinking about it from a relationship standpoint, not just a transactional standpoint.
What about, I know you mentioned this earlier, but there's certain beats that different reporters are assigned. Is there a particular beat that's most often going to be more interested in, like archives material or stories related to cultural heritage collections?
It all depends on your angle. And I think the beats are someplace too where, depending on your angle, sometimes you can get creative. So you can always just start with the editor, start with the main newsroom contacts. But oftentimes, you can just go to their website and see who's writing the kinds of stories that are similar to yours. Lots of times they'll list all of their beats on there. It's good to go back and check because the reporters change so often and they change beats often. So someone who was your education reporter 6 months ago might not be your education reporter anymore. So for us at OSU, those education reporters are oftentimes our go-to, but think about the topic too. So, if you have something on pandemics, maybe the health reporter is who you go to. And so you can just, and I would just encourage you to be creative about the beats and where you pitch, but trying to customize your pitch to that beat. And sometimes if you have a really good relationship with a reporter at a particular outlet and they're not in your beat, if you have a good relationship, like if they're a bud, you can just call them up and be like, hey, I have this story. Who do you think this would be good for? And with communicators too, we do this a lot. So if you're trying to pitch to a brand new news organization, one that you haven't pitched a story to, call someone who has placed a story there and ask them for some advice. Because, if they've worked with them before, they're going to know who to call, when to call, what kind of stories they like, what kind of stories they don't. They can kind of give you the inside scoop.
That's really helpful. Well, we are at 3 o'clock and I haven't seen any more questions come through. Oh, wait, really quick. What software tech do you use for your online digital collections? I can answer that. We use primarily Content DM, but we also have some use for Omeka, and sometimes depending on the need, we utilize YouTube, we utilize SoundCloud. For podcasting, we do, can't think of it right now. What is it, Bonnie? Do you remember?
Or
Libsyn for podcasting. But the primary digital collections, Content DM and Omeka.
Well, and Content DM also was one of the reasons why I really wanted to create those landing pages. A lot of our digital collections were dropping straight into Content DM, which is great for storing stuff. And really, it works well for sorting and searching. You can search multiple collections. But if you've never been in there and you don't know how to use it, it's a lot right off the bat. And so our landing pages kind of warm you up first, tell you a little bit about it before you dive right in and start searching.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think everyone's probably familiar with that too. All right, well, thank you, Bonnie, for your time. This has been really great. Thank you, everybody, for your attention and your good questions. This recording will end up on the OAA resources page, and I'll share that back out with everybody too, and Bonnie will either share her slides or I will share them for her. All right, thanks everybody, much appreciated.